Well, hello everybody. My name is Tristan and I'm an ecologist at Hampshire County Council in the south of England. The title of my talk is Plants and Planning. Do plant records pack a punch? I think the answer to that question is a resounding yes. And in order to hopefully convince you of that, I've got three short case studies from my work, which I think illustrate very well how plant records can and do lead to better informed decision making and positive outcomes in planning for plants and for people. I'm part of a relatively small team based at the county, and we provide ecological support to the county council itself, and then also various district, borough and unitary authorities within Hampshire and West Sussex. With about 2,000 planning applications coming across our desks each year, we simply don't have the resources to visit the vast majority of development sites. So we are hugely reliant on data. Luckily, we work very closely with our colleagues at the Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre, HBIC, and through our geographic information systems, we have access to about 8 million biological records, priority and broad habitat mapping, and a wealth of botanical survey reports produced by HBIC botanists, mostly covering the county's network of local wildlife sites, such as sites of importance for nature conservation, sinks, and road verges of ecological importance. I'm a BSBI member, so I do use the BSBI database as a useful backup reference, particularly for some of that sort of fine-grained contextual information that may not be available in the HBIC notable plant layer. As you might expect, I review an awful lot of commercial ecology surveys submitted with the applications. It's fair to say they vary in quality. Most, however, are pretty good. Some are very good indeed, but I have over the years seen some absolute howlers. That's a whole other presentation right there. So for our first example, we're going to head to the northeast of the county and to the town of Borden. Borden is a large military town situated in what was once the extensive Walmer Forest landscape that would have been so familiar to Gilbert White. In the early 1800s, the military moved in, and the modern town has really grown up around that military presence. For the last few years, the military have been moving on and releasing large tracts of land, and much of that is under new development now. So there's an awful lot of development activity going on in and around Borden. Alongside some of those bigger strategic sites, there's a lot of smaller stuff going on as well. The example on the left is just one of those. So this is in a fairly typical ordinary housing estate within Borden, areas of managed grassland, planted trees, terraced housing, all very, very ordinary. The proposal was pretty modest as well, sort of reconfiguring and enlarging some off-street parking, sprucing up the dwellings, a bit of new drainage, some electric vehicle charging points. It's one of those applications that could have quite easily have just passed by because we've got bigger fish to fry. You know, it's just amenity grassland, right? Impacts are probably negligible. Is it really one to be that worried about? However, given that landscape history and given my knowledge of the area, I had a hunch that perhaps this grassland might be something a bit more interesting. So I looked on our HBIC priority habitat mapping layer. The site here is circled in red and there's nothing there. We've got various bits of mapped priority habitat, a bit of heathland, some acid grassland, some mixed deciduous woodland and various other bits and bobs, but nothing within the site. So, you know, maybe my hunch was wrong. However, we look at the plant records we do have and they tell another story altogether. So we've got a range of the scarcer clovers and then species such as upright chickweed and mossy stonecrop. And these are clearly indicating that this area is supporting good quality acid grassland. We're just very lucky that one of Hampshire's best botanists happened to spend a bit of time recording there. So what does this example tell us? Well, firstly, that the priority habitat mapping does not provide the full picture at present. So to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, the mapping is the known knowns, and we can be pretty sure that there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Could this lead to consultants and local planning authority ecologists like myself making assumptions based on incomplete habitat data? Almost certainly yes. I think this example also illustrates that amenity does not equal low quality. Yes, the area is of high amenity value. It's just a bit of grassland within a housing estate, but it's also of very high ecological value as well. So there is this assumption that amenity means low value, and it certainly doesn't, as this example shows. And this is critical in this urban suburban context where these are the local irreplaceable habitats. We don't have swathes of lovely ancient woodland. We don't have pristine wetlands or lovely wildflower meadows. The ecological fabric of these areas is dotted around within a developed landscape. So knowing where these areas are is absolutely critical if we are to protect and hopefully conserve them. It's particularly important because of two national initiatives that are going to be delivered in part through the planning system. First of those is a nature recovery network, which is going to be rolled out locally through local nature recovery strategies. And you could quite easily argue that how could we have a fully workable recovery strategy for nature if we don't actually know where some of the key bits of habitat are, particularly in our urban and suburban areas. Similarly, biodiversity net gain comes into force next year, becomes mandatory next year, but is already well out of the trap, and stuff is going on all across the country. Again, might it not be better to use biodiversity net gain to try and protect or identify, protect, and hopefully enlarge some of these areas that might otherwise be an easy target for not only development, but biodiversity net gain initiatives such as tree planting? So knowing where these habitats are is absolutely critical, I think. And this example shows that we can use plant records where we have them to update our priority habitat layers. And that gives people like me a hook in the planning system to say, aha, hang on a minute, we've got something interesting here. I need some further information and we need to think about what's happening on this site. So for our next example, we're going to go to the opposite corner of the county, to the southwest and to the New Forest. This is a scheme that I've been working on with colleagues in the highway safety team. This is a crossroads in the east of the New Forest that had seen a series of collisions between motor vehicles and cyclists, which has very sadly resulted in 2 fatalities and a number of very serious injuries. Something clearly had to be done. After a number of calming measures proving effective, the decision was made to kink one of the arm of the crossroads to create a staggered junction. Building a new section of road within such a heavily protected site such as the New Forest is not something anyone does lightly, and so we needed full planning permission and all the supporting information. I was tasked with producing the ecological assessment and, critically, a habitats regulations assessment, or HRA. The HRA was necessary because we were impacting directly on our European designated sites, our highest level of protection, in this case the New Forest Special Area of Conservation. I needed to know which of the constituent habitat parts, constituent habitats of the New Forest SAC were present within our area and how we would be impacting them. So I asked one of my colleagues, botanist colleagues in HBIC, to undertake a detailed assessment of the area, which he did, and provided me with national vegetation classification habitats, and I was able to convert that into the special area of conservation habitats, so we knew exactly which bits of the SAC we were going to be impacting. That enabled me to complete the habitats regulations assessment. Planning permission was granted to this, and everything was done to the satisfaction of Natural England and all the various other stakeholders. The scheme is now built. Our mitigation strategy was quite nerve-wracking for me and entailed basically translocating the habitat from the new road area into the old road area once we dug that out. Our contractors were very game, and using a mix of a peat bucket and a kind of bodged together massive cake slice, they managed to very carefully take out the turf from the new road area and fit it into the gap left by the old, fill in the little gaps and crevices with some sand and soil, and then drive a big dumper truck all over it to bed it in. Seems to have worked really well, and we'll be monitoring that over the coming years. We had to contend with that quite scary translocation. We had to contend with wayward horses, rare reptiles, ground nesting birds, unexploded ordnance, and trying not to dig up Chris Packham's new broadband cable. So I think this example shows that plant records can lead directly to better informed decision making, and in this case providing a very safe junction for all road users. I think that's a good result. So finally, the last example, and this is really my favourite. So a number of years ago, a planning application came in the southeast of the county on the lovely Hayling Island. This was for a replacement dwelling and some works at the bottom of the garden to replace a bit of seawall and replace and repair and replace a slipway leading down onto Chichester Harbour. So I did my usual due diligence desk-based assessment, and that showed that we had records of green-winged orchids and autumn ladies' tresses in the area. So I wrote to the case officer and said, okay, I need some further information. I'm worried that plants may be impacted. Very soon after, we got a call through our switchboard, and the applicant was on the phone wanting to talk to me. So my heart sank, and I was fully expecting a bit of a ding-dong, because some people really don't like being asked to provide information that's going to cost them more money. However, much to my surprise and delight, not only was the gentleman aware of orchids in the area, he'd in fact been protecting and nurturing them for years, and they were definitely his orchids, and he was very, very keen on them. So he was able to send me his hand-drawn maps showing exactly where on the site his orchids were and at what densities, and we were able to secure a sort of construction management plan that ensured that those orchids were fenced off during construction, and he was going to be keeping a very beady eye on his contractors to make sure his lovely orchids weren't going to be squished. So I think that's almost the perfect example of how plant records can lead to better decision making and a very positive outcome, both for the plants and for the applicant as well. So plant records really do pack a punch. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks ever so much for listening, and please submit your data.